Good afternoon. I would like to say that I'm very grateful for this assignment. This is something that I have done a lot of preparation and research on over the last few years, and it would actually be a topic that I would present in a class. Um, the title of my lecture would be the Chickamauga Cherokee: Their Life, Their Death, and Their Resurrection. Um, and the thesis statement for this is the Chickamauga Cherokee gave up tribal recognition and land granted to them in Arkansas by the United States government rather than accept resettlement to Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma. Numerous land treaties, allotments, and land tract agreements resulted in the erasure of the Chickamauga's presence in our collective and shared history. And Arkansas became the Chickamauga's final stand against further government relocation. The loss of traditional hunting grounds, sacred burial grounds, language, and traditions set the Chickamauga on the path to becoming ghosts of our collective and shared history. Some of my primary sources would have been William Blount, who was the author of the Land Grab Act. I also did an interview with Chief Jimmy Kirsch, who was is currently one of the 5 Chickamauga chiefs. John Sevier, who was a governor in Tennessee. And then several documents from the Indian Affairs Office through the founders.org. Some of my secondary sources, and one of the ones that I would actually use in a class, of course, I had Walter L. Brown and Ed Beers and Errol M. Gibson, Fort Smith, Little Gibraltar on the Arkansas, which actually goes into some of the history of the Chickamauga migration to the Arkansas area. But the one that I would really focus on and that I really liked was Colin Calloway's Pen and Ink Witchcraft, Treaties and Treaty Making in American Indian History. I'm leaning more toward my doctoral paper being more focused on the treaties that the United States did and how actually without using guns, without actually fighting. I mean, there was, but we actually did more damage and managed to gain more control through treaties and broken treaties than we did through actual fighting. So the Chickamauga claim that they have separate origins from what we consider today the modern-day Cherokee. And I will say on this that we tend to lump regions together under tribal names. There are many tribes that don't associate themselves in the same manner that we do. Like I said, that's labels that we gave. They actually claim to go back to the late Archaic period, which would have been from about 2000 BC to about 200 AD. The Woodland era from about 100 BC and 200 AD. And then that they also evolved out of the Mound culture, the Mississippian, the Mobilian. And they actually, in their history, show where they migrated along the southern part of the United States to the lower part of Tennessee, Georgia, in that area. There's also documented migration of a group of Native Americans who were expelled from the Iroquois Nation. And the Chickamauga claim that those are the people that we today consider the modern Cherokee. And actually, there are Jesuit missionaries who document this migration in the 1600s. I did find this quote by Herman Melville. It says, "The Anglo-Saxon hive has extirpated paganism from the greater part of the North American continent, but with it they have likewise extirpated the greater portion of the red race. Civilization is gradually sweeping from the earth the lingering vestiges of paganism and at the same time shrinking forms of its unhappy worshippers." And sadly that is what's happened. So the earliest contact that we have with Native Americans, and most generally the Cherokee and the southeastern Native Americans, was in 1684, and that was one of the first treaties, and that was basically concerning trade and slave exchange. Pre-Revolutionary era, there were 14 treaties, most of which we did not keep. There were 9 pre-constitutional treaties, most of which we did not keep. There were 23 treaties, 11 of them named land cession or verification of land cessions that benefited colonists only. And these are post-revolutionary, and these treaties were used to benefit colonists. These treaties also began the assimilation of what today is considered the modern-day Cherokee, which would be the Upper and Middletown Cherokee. And whether you see it as fortunate or unfortunate, they assimilated readily and did it well, actually did it better than some European colonists. They built European-style homes. They wore European-style clothing. However, the Lower Town Cherokee, who would be the Chickamauga, they did not want to assimilate. And this was actually the beginning of the end of the Chickamauga. The modern-day Cherokee resented the Chickamauga for not wanting to assimilate because they felt like they were holding them back, making them look bad. But the Chickamauga, they wanted to keep their land. They wanted to keep their religion, their language, their customs. And so from 1776 to 1868, there were 40 total post-revolution and post-constitutional treaties. Most of these concerned land cession with no restitution. And you're wondering why were we doing all these treaties, and why did they all involve land? So basically you were having a land rush after the Revolutionary War. The populations increased 714,909 people, more than what there was during the Revolutionary War. John Sevier, the first governor of Tennessee, and William Blount, senator for the state of Tennessee, they use Army pension requests to invade and take Cherokee land. And an interesting fact on this is that the Chickamauga fought in the Revolutionary War against the colonists. So with these massive amount of people that hadn't been paid for their service in the military, they're wanting land. They're wanting to move on out. The population is increasing exponentially. People are wanting to spread out and have their own thing. So our solution to this was to make treaties and make grabs for land. In 1785, you had the Hopewell Treaty, and basically what it did, it annulled the previous Cherokee Treaty with the Spanish. And it said that the Cherokee were not allowed to hold any foreign allegiance but to the United States, which basically says they give up sovereignty as an independent nation and that they are now completely under United States law. However, there was no attempt whatsoever by the United States to safeguard the terms of the Hopewell Treaty, which would have protected the Cherokee and their lands. In 1789, a Chickamauga named Spring Frog finally took upon himself to migrate west of the Mississippi River. Spring Frog came across, and he would have probably migrated, we'll say, into the around the Mississippi, Arkansas River area and spread out from there. But more notably, in 1795, Chief Diwali actually came across with another group of Chickamauga, and they migrated to the lower part of the Missouri-Arkansas line. However, the Great Quake of 1811 and 1812 caused such large topographical changes to the Missouri-Arkansas area that Chief Diwali decides to take his people south further into Arkansas and even into Texas. For the next 50 years, you would have a major migration by Old Settler or Lower Town Chickamauga. And basically, they're going to be moving into Arkansas. The one treaty that they in 1817, the Turkeytown Treaty, exchanged Cherokee lands east for lands west of the Mississippi, equal amounts. However, because of Spring Frog and Diwali, you already had a Chickamauga presence in Arkansas. But basically what the Turkeytown Treaty did, and there's a place around Russellville, Clarksville, Arkansas, it's called the Rock of the Dardanelle, and that's where Dardanelle Lake is. But basically, if you went along the Arkansas River and did kind of a triangle out, they gave them this land in perpetuity, which would mean basically as far as you could go. But the Chickamauga established and managed to settle along the Arkansas River and up into the Arkansas Ozarks, and they did well. They intermingled with other settlers. They did well. Even though they had been displaced and moved out of their homes, they did okay. At this time, also, a lot of Cherokee of the Upper and Middletown began to voluntarily move to Arkansas. And those that would remain in the Tennessee, Georgia area would come to regret this. You actually had defined boundaries between the Cherokee and the Creek, and some would say that the Chickamauga were encouraged to move to Arkansas as a barrier against the Creek. The Treaty of Washington in 1828 is when the Cherokee, who had migrated to Arkansas behind the Chickamauga, sent Major Ridge to speak for all relocated Native Americans in Arkansas. However, he didn't really have permission to do that from all of them. And this would lead to also the Indian Removal Act of 1830, the Treaty of New Dakota. And this was spurred by the gold rush in Georgia. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 would lead to what we all know of eventually as the Trail of Tears. In 1830, the Indian Removal Act was challenged in court by the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, and it was actually ruled in favor of the Cherokee. The following year, however, it was overturned in Worcester versus Georgia. Forcible removal begins to establish the new Oklahoma territory. Again, Major Ridge, his son John Ridge, and his nephew Elias Boudinot bargained away Arkansas for Oklahoma. At this point in time, the Chickamauga declared a blood law and attacked and killed Major Ridge, his son John, his nephew Elias, and you may recognize the name Stan Wadey escaped. However, this would cause a lasting and irrevocable split between the Chickamauga and the modern Cherokee. Again, the Chickamauga were well established and flourishing in Arkansas. They had intermingled with the white settlers that had migrated there. However, between 1836 and 1837, anti-miscegenation laws came into effect in Arkansas as it became a state. This is where, when you come to this part of the area, you will hear terms like Black Dutch, Black Irish. Native Americans who were established, had land, had homes. They would literally send the most light-skinned person to the door to answer the census takers. They would give white names. They would give all this information, and they would claim white identity. But this also meant that they had to bury their traditions, their religion, their language, their rituals, and told in secret. And this almost caused the immediate death of an entire culture. Chief Courage said that these people made a noble sacrifice. They had love of their traditions, and for that, they suffered an ethnogenesis. Today, the Chickamauga fight for recognition federally, separate from modern Cherokee. Old settler Chickamauga Cherokee actually in 1999 gave a letter of intent to petition for federal recognition. And that was the end of my presentation that I've gave to historical societies, to faculty symposiums, and actually to a couple of high school classes. I hope y'all enjoy it, and thank you.